Hey, everybody. We're going to wait a minute or two for everybody to kind of filter in here. It looks like Zoom is letting folks in. That's amazing. As we kind of wait to get started, if you want to drop in the city and state or country that you're dialing in from in the chat, please feel free to do so. It's always interesting to see where folks are dialing in from and who else we kind of have on this. Barbados, I'm extremely jealous. Erica, I think that's a familiar name, especially for Bangor, Maine. Atlanta, Dallas, amazing. Southern California, always jealous up here in Boston of people in those warm climates this time of year. Dallas, Burlington. Burlington's also beautiful. Cutter, all right, nice. Boston as well. Yeah, I'm complaining about the weather, but as Janine points out, it's spring finally. It's like 60 today. Northern Indiana, Fort Worth. All right. I like the people that have the exclamation points. They're proud of where they're from. I'm sure other people are proud too. Amazing. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm going to give you a little bit of a lay of the land here in terms of the agenda. We've got an awesome webinar on a really timely topic here, and I'm excited to speak with two experts in this really dynamic and important field of AI compliance. So we're going to be talking about what HR teams need to monitor, how organizations can get ready to stay compliant with new legislation. Seems like there's a lot that's happened, as well as some in the pipeline that we can talk about, kind of where the puck is going. We'll also explore what kind of questions you need to be asking vendors to ensure that AI tools in your HR tech stack are being used responsibly. Throughout this session, we've got a couple of sort of interactive elements. So what tends to happen is about 3 or 4 minutes into this, somebody pops in their LinkedIn URL because they're like, oh, wow, there's all these like awesome people who are also interested in this case, AI compliance. I want to network with these folks. Please hold off on that. We're actually going to have a dedicated networking power hour in about 35 minutes where everybody can kind of network with themselves. You can drop in your LinkedIn, you can connect with other people. It's an amazing way to meet other folks interested in the things that you're interested in people in your tribe. And we've made amazing connections. The last one that we did 2 weeks ago was about fractional HR, and we had 1,000 people join that, and just yeah, amazing networking opportunity there. We're also going to have a giveaway halfway through this. We're going to have a couple of polls. But before I get into all that, let me give a couple of introductions. I'll start with myself just because it's fast. If we haven't met yet, my name is Phil Strazula. I'm the founder of Select Software Reviews, where our North Star is to help HR professionals find and buy the right HR technology. Around 100,000 companies a month use our research. We've got reviews on our website. And then we also have a team of advisors standing by that you can talk to for free and get bespoke advice on which vendors you should be looking at, HRIS, ATS, AI recruiting, you name it, as well as pricing, really any other questions that you have around HR tech selection. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We actually have a pretty cool giveaway. We're going to be giving away 3 months free of ChatGPT Pro to folks on this call about halfway through this. With me today are two amazing speakers. Dr. Carey Miller is the founder and head of AI governance and research at the Center for Inclusive Change. She's a subject matter expert in HR, AI technology risks and governments, AI procurement, and AI audits. And she teaches AI and leadership at Wilmington University. Bob is an independent advisor and technology industry veteran at the intersection of responsible AI, talent, and transformation. He also hosts the Elevate Your AIQ podcast, where he talks with experts, founders, and practitioners about these topics to promote AI literacy and readiness, human centricity, which is something we're going to talk about today, and responsible innovation. So thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. I also want to say that the session's going to be recorded. We're going to send a takeaways document And this does qualify for one SHRM credit or one HRCI credit. The last note here is that we do like to keep it interactive. And so if you've got questions, you've got insights, please feel free to share them in the chat. And one last reminder, because it's already started to happen again, please don't post your LinkedIn URLs into the chat just yet. We're going to have a dedicated LinkedIn Power Hour, networking Power Hour in about 35 minutes where you'll get a chance to do that, connect with other folks on the call who are interested in this topic. I'm also going to launch a poll right now that allows us on the panel to have just a better appreciation for where everybody's at from an AI compliance perspective, what you're interested in. And this is going to help us tailor the conversation a little bit so that we can deliver what is going to be most impactful for all of you who are taking your time out to join us on your workday. So please take a look at that poll. Let us know where you're at. And as we wait for the results, Bob and Carrie, I'd love to have kind of your general thoughts on, there's a lot happening today with AI, regulations, laws, changing and evolving landscape. Can you give us a sense for what HR teams should be paying attention to right now?
Carrie,
you can start first.
Did you want to go, Bob?
No, please go ahead.
Oh, gosh, I mean, it is overwhelming. Let's first just admit what we're facing, right? There's a lot to try to digest. I would say, so we're trying to figure out what we want to pay attention to, right? And I honestly believe it's the same stuff we've always paid attention to. Just because it's AI doesn't mean we take our eye off of our usual ball. We always want to make sure that things are fair, equitable, we're not discriminating. It just so happens that those things are now inside of these newer technologies. So now we just have to have this thing we call AI literacy. So that's just extra we have to do with our jobs. So it's not like all the concepts are new. It's just we have to now know, how does that play out inside of AI? Because all the laws are doing is saying, oh, remember that disability thing that we had, or remember that discrimination thing that we had, right? Don't do that in AI.
Keep doing that. Yeah. Keep being compliant with the discrimination law.
Right. So if you bust it down like that, it's not really as overwhelming as you might think. You really just need to upskill and learn, how does AI really kind of function inside of that big black box? And there are ways to even break that down so it's not so like, oh my gosh, I don't do technology. Like it's okay. It's it's digestible.
Amazing. Bob, any initial comments?
Yeah, I would say, obviously totally agree with Carrie. I would say, based on some conversations I've had with a lot of experts in the space, in addition to Keith Sonderling, who was the former EEOC commissioner, who's now deputy director at Department of Labor, he would say the same thing that Carrie just said, which is, look, we've got these pre-existing discrimination laws going back to the 1960s, 1970s. Don't use AI to break any of those pre-existing laws. Now, things are changing fast. There's a lot of different legislation and regulations cropping up in different jurisdictions. Even in the EU, we've seen some controversy between, what's established in GDPR versus what's now in the EU AI Act. For example, all of that centers around user privacy and the specific data that you're allowed to access. So my friend Martin Redstone was just writing about this on his Substack the other day. You can't judge whether someone made a biased decision if you don't actually look at the data to see if they actually violated some law. Well, the GDPR might say, well, but you're not allowed to look at that data, right? So you get into, even within jurisdictions, you've got some conflicting information. In the US, I'm not optimistic we'll see anything at the federal level. So now we've got to look and sort of juggle things at the state or municipality kind of level, as we've seen this patchwork of legislation cropping up. So, but I think to Carrie's point, a lot of this is about maintaining some of the structure that you have within, governance, risk, and compliance. But we'll get into this in a little bit. But part of this is also recognizing that everything around the way that we use AI and algorithmic models in our decision making and for other tasks, this is a shared responsibility. I don't want to put this all on HR, so we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, it's super interesting, especially as you point out, sort of a patchwork legal framework, perhaps in the United States, where New York State might pass something, and then I guess it's really up to each organization to either follow, hey, we're gonna take the strictest sort of regulation across any state and implement that across our company, as I think a lot of companies did with GDPR, for example, even though similar rules were not in the United States, like, hey, we're just going to treat everybody like a European citizen, or not. I think one of the biggest areas that HR and talent acquisition professionals are interested and perhaps scared of is when it comes to vetting candidates and assessing candidates. And I'm wondering if there are any, sort of case studies on what can go wrong here, how can these systems go awry, and what can we do to make sure that this isn't going to be a problem for our organization. Carrie,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, Phil, there's certainly been headlines, because sometimes when someone does something creative, I'll say, it catches people's attention, right? Like using AI as a co-pilot in the middle of an interview, right? Or using some companies taking a sort of stricter stance and saying, well, I can tell that this resume was written by an AI. Is that okay? So sometimes it's the way a company has sort of looked at this and said, we're just gonna put the brakes on maybe until we establish some clear, guidelines and policies. But we've got it. This is where sometimes there's a difference between what I would classify as responsible AI, which is this umbrella topic that obviously we'll get into here around governance and privacy and cybersecurity and transparency and fairness, and human centricity, which says, let's look at this through a different lens, not from a legal sort of let's play defense kind of lens, but let's understand how we maintain our humanity and our humanness in this process and make sure we're providing optimal experiences for all the humans that are involved in the hiring cycle, or the entire talent life cycle from applicant to alumni. But let's also start first with the human being that's actually being evaluated, which is the candidate.
Carrie, have you seen anything specific happen with these AI assessment tools and perhaps coming out with the wrong outcomes? And have you thought much about, well, here we go, we got a slide and show.
Have I thought about it?
Yes,
I can't I can't stop thinking about it. Absolutely. So I write audit criteria on this. I've been writing audit criteria for AI systems in HR for the last 2.5 years. It is an extreme focus of mine. It was also my dissertation topic. It's all I think about some days. Yes, it is. There are all kinds of ways that these systems can go sideways. There are also all kinds of ways that if we just pause and use a little common sense, and it's really common sense, honestly, it's that simple sometimes, for governance, to just be like, oh, maybe if we just don't do it this way, it'll be all right. It's sometimes that easy. Like when you're doing a job description, maybe just don't ask ChatGPT to give you a job description, because if we know that ChatGPT has been majorly trained on Reddit as its corpus of data, we would know that Reddit was based on a lot of 22-year-old men providing answers to Reddit. So the job descriptions aren't going to be great. So if you turn that job description task over to a junior staffer, they might not catch all of the phrases that make that type of a job description discriminatory or solicit discriminatory types of resumes to come back to you. A senior HR professional who's been in the game a long time will start to pick up on words and phrases that you would say, oh, I can't say it that way because it'll discourage women from, applying or whatever. Junior staff won't know that. So it's just common sense stuff like that. And it happens all across these, every single one of these milestones that's on the screen. You can pick out exactly, where do you post it? LinkedIn, if you post on LinkedIn, fantastic, but you have to recognize LinkedIn is using what's called the Skills Cloud. There's a lot of inferred data on the Skills Cloud. Right now, LinkedIn thinks I'm a great digital marketer. I haven't done digital marketing in 15 years. I don't know if you know this, but Google's different. There's hardly any digital marketing now on Google. Like, thanks, LinkedIn. You're misleading a lot of people. So, yeah, you just have to kind of slow down, know what's inside of this thing, and say, what is this going to do, and how should I make sure I put a guardrail around it? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and get off my soapbox.
What are some recommended guardrails?
One is to not fall for a pilot with blinders on. So vendors will come and they often want you to, they'll sell you on a problem you're not even sure you have. And so it sounds like you need this, right? And you're like, okay, we'll try it. And next thing you know, you're 30 days in, and then you start to adoption, and you haven't asked the right questions. You haven't asked stakeholders in the equation to determine what might go wrong with this thing. And then you're into adoption and a contract. You don't know if the contract allows you to keep your data, if they're using your data to retrain the system for other things. Like all kinds of stuff can go wrong with that. So if you take the reins and you say, actually, you know what, let me just make sure I have a legitimate use case. Let me ask a couple people who this might impact, how they feel about this. Let's circle the wagons for a minute. And then you'll start to come up with your own guardrails. You'll say, yeah, we want to use it, but we actually need a senior person to look at these answers when they come out of the system. We can't have the junior person do this.
I know in our business, and we're a smaller company, we use an assessment tool, and the assessment tool has some sort of like algo that will look at each candidate and score their answers based on the perfect answer for a question, and therefore score each person and kind of sort it. And there's some amount of signal here, but I haven't found it to be very indicative. And basically we've just trained everybody who is involved in the recruiting process, like, hey, like this is like 1% of what you should think about when you think about analyzing candidates, right? Like it's cool. Maybe, 5 years from now, it'll be a lot better. But right now, if somebody's a 75% fit or a 34% fit, it doesn't really tell you much about the candidate itself. So training is something that we've sort of implemented. And to your point, a more senior person sees it, understands it immediately, but that junior person who maybe is in charge of screening, they're not necessarily as likely to see it. I'm kind of curious, beyond some of this compliance stuff, like, have y'all seen any cultural implications from utilizing these AI tools and how they might impact the employee experience?
I see it every day, Phil. I mean, you can tell by looking at survey results and not just the results, but the inconsistency in results across surveys. There's a lot of apprehension about what this all means. If you're a manager, maybe it's you fear that your autonomy to make decisions is being questioned, that this is going to come in, and even if it's not making an autonomous decision by itself, which I really hope nothing is actually doing that, but even if it's carrying a lot of weight, people are going to question well, I got here because, in large part, because of my my common sense and my intelligence and my judgment. And so there's a fear there, and then you have AI coming to the average individual contributor, and communications might say, well, this is to make you even more effective in your job. This is to alleviate the grunt work, and automate some of that to, allow you to, move on to higher order tasks, more valuable tasks, more client facing tasks, or whatever the scenario is. But on some level, people are also thinking, am I basically just training it? It needs to know how I work, and it needs to know what I do in order for it to be effective. So am I ostensibly just training my digital backfill to come in? Because when the stock market is not looking so good, you have to know that, your company may make some uncomfortable decisions, not because they necessarily want to, but because they have to. And then they'll start looking at all this data. In some ways, this is just the natural sort of progression of sort of instrumenting everything and having metrics for everything. The question is, which levers will the company, pull, and will they stay human centric in the process as best they can for their own survival, but also in the best interest of their talent, because without their talent, like, they don't have much of a business, right? The talent is what's executing your business and your technical strategy. Your talent is what's supporting your customers and your partners. So I just think this is about, the culture at individual companies and how they effectively communicate what they're doing, but also to be, transparent with their talent about why they're making, these investments. And hopefully, if they're getting value and return of some of these investments in AI and automation, that when they go to reinvest some of that savings, that a lot of that goes to, upskilling and reskilling their loyal, employees. So some of this these aren't necessarily easy decisions, but I do think this is having, a significant impact on people up and down the hierarchy of an organization and across pretty much every industry.
Yeah, I totally agree. And a mentor of mine said, I'm choosing to be an AI optimist. And I feel like it's perhaps, interesting word choice, right? It's not like my logical conclusion is, but we don't know. And I'm also choosing to be an AI optimist. I think one thing that we've struggled with culturally is you're on a Zoom call, you're on a team call, and there's like 7 like co-pilots that join that are recording every minute of it. And it's like, what does that mean, right? Like, am I on record now making a joke about somebody? Am I on record maybe saying, it's like, don't put anything in email you wouldn't want to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal or whatever. It's like, don't say anything. And it's almost like I can't even think it. It's like almost at that point, right? Where there's sort of this pressure on us. And, my wife's an attorney, and she basically is as paranoid as most attorneys are. And it's like, hey, all this stuff is discoverable, right? You have a lawsuit, and this is stuff that can be unearthed to prove a point and come back to bite you in the future. And seems like another place to potentially be vigilant, as well as have a negative sort of pressure in some scenarios. And again, I think it gets back to empathy, understanding, is this having a negative impact? Of course, the compliance aspect as well. And then perhaps a new norm setting, new training around how do we best utilize these sorts of helpers, which can be extremely helpful. I don't want to discount that at all. I do want to take a quick break, and I want to do a little giveaway here. A lot of folks obviously on the call are interested in AI, and we have a giveaway for ChatGPT, ChatGPT Pro specifically. And I'm going to talk for 2 seconds about basically what we do at SSR, Select Software Reviews, the company that I run, which is buying HR technology, it's extremely hard. We've talked a little bit about HR tech, especially in the AI context, and whether you're looking at a payroll software, an HCM, an ATS, an AI sourcing tool, an EOR, a PEO, whatever the case may be, there are hundreds of vendors out there. And we basically have a huge database of all those vendors, what people like about them, what people don't like about them, what features they actually have. And we have a team of advisors that is on demand, totally free for HR professionals to call up and utilize to figure out what solution is best for my business. And so what we do on these webinars, we usually have some sort of fun giveaway. If you book a call with our advisor and are able to utilize our offering, again, this is really for people who are looking for HR technology. They want to start building a short list. They want to start talking to vendors. I just put in the chat somebody's, or I'm sorry, a link to one of our advisors' calendars. So you can book a call directly with Zach through that link that I just posted. If you are in the market and you need help, and we can help with shortlisting, with vendor introductions, we can help with pricing. Am I paying too much? I just got a contract from a vendor. Is this crazy? We have a lot of pricing data, et cetera. So we can help out with all that stuff. We have a 4.9 star rating with this. It's completely free. And again, if you book a call and we're able to help you by the end of the, if you book a call by the end of the webinar and we're able to help you, then we'll hook you up with a ChatGPT subscription for 3 months so you can get some more hands-on knowledge with these AI models. And I think we're also going to make like a 20-minute video around how can you actually use this sort of tool for kind of typical HR and talent acquisition tasks as well. So that can be impactful. We actually did a webinar about that a few months ago, and it was a hit because we basically just opened up a screen share, went through all the ChatGPT stuff, and it's amazing what it can do, as a lot of us know. So anyways, yeah, take advantage of that if you're looking for HR tech. And with that, I think I'd also just like to launch a quick poll here as well, just about what's the toughest part that you found about evaluating HR technology vendors. We're going to talk about HR tech a little bit in this and procurement, and it's just always interesting to see kind of what people are struggling with so that we can be an even better resource for folks as they go through what is usually a very painful process. Nobody likes to buy HR technology. There are too many vendors, and there's a lot of other stuff on your plate. Bob, I want to understand from your perspective, how do you think HR professionals should be monitoring for responsible/irresponsible AI use, tools, company operations, shared workspaces, etc.?
Yeah, this is a tough one, Phil. I mean, I feel like this is a good example of where, you need a strong partnership across HR and IT and maybe the data team, which may be under the CIO, depending on your org structure. But I do think this is a shared responsibility. If you think about AI being bolted on or sort of native to a lot of your tech stack, right? Not just in talent acquisition or talent management, but throughout, core HR and throughout the organization, really. It seems like every vendor now has AI capability, and this has been happening over the last couple of years, probably even before generative AI entered our lexicon a couple of years ago. And so I think if you look at the trajectory of data privacy and cybersecurity, and the fact and just cloud computing, software as a service, technologies, there's risk everywhere. Anyone can be a weak link. You could, upload information to somewhere that was proprietary, and now it's exposed because that data gets sucked into some other system or some, goes out to a broader, ecosystem or what have you. And we have that situation with some of at least the public AI solutions, whether that's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, Microsoft Copilot, although Microsoft, because being such an enterprise player, they probably have a lot more controls in place. But you've just got to be careful about what systems you're using. But you also think about the concept of back in the day we called it BYOD, or bring your own device, right? So from a cybersecurity perspective, you knew that you didn't just have to monitor the corporate systems and the corporate devices, but every time someone brought their personal, mobile phone or happened to bring a different device, maybe a tablet or something into the office, and they connect to the Wi-Fi, well, that's another, you've basically inadvertently increased the sort of attack surface of for a cyber attack. So AI just, I think, follows a similar pattern in which, again, whether you're talking about HR or not, HR just doesn't necessarily have the technical team and know-how to understand and monitor all of those channels, but certainly they are the curators and owners of some of the most sensitive data in the organization, obviously as it relates to people and their employee records, whether that's around compensation, or it's performance, or anything related to health and wellness. This is super sensitive data, and so HR obviously has a role to play here and to maintain some level of AI, literacy and compliance, things like that, just like they've done in previous, sort of categories of technology. But I don't think they can do it alone. I think that's going to be, a shared responsibility. But certainly within HR, extending into, talent, anyone that rolls up to the chief people officer or chief human resources officer has this almost extra level of care and due diligence. So I think, honestly, AI compliance training and some level of AI literacy is going to come to your onboarding, training at some point if it's not there already. It's just too important for us not to, make sure people are following, best practices and are being safe, right from day zero.
What about, here's a question. So let's say you're head of HR, you buy some sort of AI powered tool. Let's say it's a AI sourcing tool, talent sourcing. So you give it a job rec, it understands the rec. Hey, you're looking for Boston-based Python engineers. It builds a short list, it outreaches to those people, and it schedules them on your recruiter's calendar. How do you diligence if that vendor is using this technology appropriately and continuously into the future using it appropriately, so that maybe, you're not just sourcing male engineers or, you're not emailing people who are digital marketers versus Python engineers. How do you think about that sort of problem?
Yeah, I think about this a lot because I spend a lot of time with those vendors in particular, and so I'm sensitive to anything that I would categorize as a shiny object, right? I'm still recovering from my own shiny object syndrome. But I'm really sensitive to it over the last couple of years since Carrie and I both participate in For Humanity, which is where I got my AI audit certification, not to be an auditor, but to really understand all the mechanics of all the things that people need to look out for. And so when I think about responsible AI, it's not just using it responsibly, it's designing and testing it responsibly. So that puts pressure on the vendors, and either in the absence of legislation or just thinking about all the different types of legislation around the world, and sort of adhering to what is the safest way for me to sort of build this solution is how I like vendors to ideally think about how they are responsible by design. So how were the developers trained? Did they go through AI literacy and responsible AI, training to understand, how to do this properly? Where did the data come from? What's the provenance of the data? Was it a big enough sort of sample size? Did you take all the necessary precautions to secure the data? Do you have enough sort of diverse data to account for all different, sort of personas and, what steps did they go through? So there's a whole new like category of questions that HR professionals should be asking vendors to hold them accountable and make sure what they give to you can be trusted, right? And so I think it puts a new level of scrutiny on the vendors and the ones that can do it right and prove that transparently. I can explain how my algorithms work. I can show you where the data, came from. I've checked all these boxes, and I've done everything in my power. Here you go, Mr. Customer. So I think it just, when you talk about, a trusted ecosystem and trusted vendors, I think this sort of establishes what that really means in the age of AI. So I think it's important to ask those right tough questions. We've got conference season coming up. We've got a lot of vendors and a lot of booths, and they're there. Ask them these harder questions to make sure what they give you is on the up and up, and they've done everything in their power to give you a responsibly designed and trusted solution. The one thing I would add to that, and I'll hand it back to you, Phil. Once you have this solution and you implement it, you are very likely going to say, okay, this is great. Now let's have it trained on our data, and it'll be even smarter. Well, yes and no. It will be able to make some adjustments based on your environment and how you operate your, people analytics team and all these other elements of what goes on within the broader HR organization. But if there's bias in your data or the data quality isn't there, and then you pull that in, you've basically sort of now tainted this system, right? It's like letting somebody with muddy shoes into your clean room, right? So now you gotta go through this again, which is why auditing generally falls on the user of the technology, because we've got to know not just whether the algorithm itself is exhibiting adverse impact, but now we've got to look at the data, and the data is going to show us, what actually, transpired, and it's going to reveal some of these things that were basically hidden until they surfaced, possibly through, a headline in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal. That's what happened to Amazon, right? Like a couple of years ago, and people still talk about that use case where it was biased towards white men, right? So these are things that everyone should be concerned about.
We're going to get to the networking power hour in a minute or two here, but Carrie, I wanted to just throw it back to you and see if you had anything to add around you're looking to partner with vendors, anything that is on your checklist to ask them or to keep in mind.
This whole situation is a team sport. It is as much on the vendors as it is on the buyers. So governance, I study procurement a lot. When I've looked at the issue of HR tech, I also look at ed tech because they're eerily similar. The way we treat students and teachers are similar to employees and employers. Every time I look at it, I keep coming back to procurement. And I just keep saying, why are we letting the bad stuff in? Because procurement is like the doorway where we can stop and say, let's ask some questions here before we let this new tech just wander through our halls. And at that moment, you have the opportunity to ask the questions that Bob is asking, because whatever that vendor did or did not do it's a mystery, right? So that's your moment to discover all of the debt that they're about to hand you. So we would have called that technical debt before. In this world now with AI, we call that ethical debt. So ethical decisions that they may have like screwed it around, or maybe just didn't quite, they're like, it's too hard, so we're just not going to do that. Or we didn't know, whatever. So they're handing you the ethical debt. So procurement is when you try to get as much information as you can to find out what are they handing me. And then once you have it, now it's yours. Now the governance responsibility is your responsibility. You have to train people. They have to know that if I write the job description that is going to lead to biased responses coming back, that's on me as the buyer, the user. I have to know that I can't misuse the system. I can't abuse the system. That when I hire a new person that's going to use it, I got to train them too. I have to retrain people. I have to recognize that this vendor is probably going to do an update on something in the future that might require retraining. I might not like what they're going to do with my data when they do that update. Like it's an ongoing, these things are like toddlers, right? You got to make sure you know what they're doing, where they're at. If they're being mean to people, you got to put them in timeout. Like it's a whole thing, right? So it's a big ecosystem that we have to play. It's a team sport. Everybody gets suited up and we get on the field together. And that's the only way to do it. Like no one person handles this by themselves. It just, that's not how it works in this day and age. So
Yeah, especially with the insane complexity.
yeah.
I want to open it up now. I know we had a couple of people that were interested in sharing their LinkedIn profile. Obviously, people are on the call. They're all interested in the same thing, right? We're all here to talk about and learn about AI compliance. And so if you are here and you want to network with other folks on the call, feel free to drop your LinkedIn profile into the chat. I'm going to drop mine in right now. And if you're putting your profile in there, it's obviously an open invitation for anybody on the call to connect. And hopefully there's some good connections made. If you connect with somebody awesome, please let us know. Send us an email. You'll get a follow-up email from me or my colleagues, and just reply to that and say like, hey, like actually, maybe I was looking for a job, or I was looking to hire somebody, or I was looking to learn about X, Y, and Z and found the perfect person, etc. So yeah, it's always a fun thing to do here. Drop it in the chat. The other thing that I'll mention as well, I know we typically have a number of HR consultants, for lack of a better word, on our webinars. And if you are a consultant and want to learn about our referral program for our advisor offering, the free HR tech advisors that I talked about previously, I will drop a link into the chat for that as well. And if you're interested in being a referral partner, you can help your clients and also earn some money, which is always a good thing. I'll drop that into the chat right here as well. Hopefully it doesn't get buried too much in the ensuing LinkedIn profile bonanza. So we've got about 15 minutes left. We have a bit to cover here. And I guess I wanted to, Carrie, throw it back to you and ask you, do you have any advice for etiquette in the workplace regarding AI, the AI note takers? They're in the meetings and sometimes they're replacing the person. The person's like, I'm not going to join. You guys have the meeting. I'll just read the notes. I've heard that getting on people's nerves. I think AI schedulers may be getting on people's nerves. And any advice, and Bob, feel free to chime in as well, around AI etiquette in the workplace.
I actually have a hilarious story about this. I was at a conference, I was presenting, I raised this issue because this drives me nuts too. And someone said that someone's note taker showed up and they weren't there to be with the note, like they just sent their note taker to the meeting.
Yeah.
Everybody in the meeting decided to open up a different, like they were in Zoom and they just decided to go to Google Meet and they left the note taker in the meeting by itself and just went to a different meeting. I died. That was so funny to me. You get what you get. Yeah, to me, there's some fundamentals, and it's just human decency and dignity and respect. It's just we kind of forget our way sometimes. So it's everything I needed to know, I learned in kindergarten stuff. So we should be have the courtesy of making someone aware when AI is present, disclosing, I'm using it. Um, Explaining what it's about to do, especially if you're using it for a consequential decision. That's the high watermark. Is if I'm going to make a decision about you and I'm going to apply AI to it, I need to tell you how this AI is going to do this job.
Mhm.
Even if it's not going to make the full decision, it's going to be a part of the decision. I owe you that explanation. And by the way, those are coming out in the laws. So build your muscle memory now. Now's the time to start getting used to doing that. Getting permission and consent. So the note takers is a great example of that. Don't just throw your note taker in and expect everybody's like, I love this. You should really have permission and consent to do that. And organizations should have policies on that too, because trade secrets do get captured in those things, and not all of them are kept private. So, you know, when Zoom turns theirs on, that information gets sucked back into Zoom. So I don't like that personally. Um, Employees in some of these systems that we have employee data in, employees should have the right to review that and the right to correct any data and the right to delete data that is wrong. So I've heard of
Mm.
cases in call centers where a call was misrecorded, like the translation software flipped and started recording the customer as the call center rep. And the customer was cussing. And then the call center rep got in trouble for cussing. It's like, it wasn't me, it was the customer. Well, there was no way to extract that information out of the system. And so that trailed that call center rep all the way through her employee reviews and everything. So those are the common sense things you want to ask stakeholders. You want to be on top of that stuff. Just everything I learned in kindergarten, you know, common sense.
It's a good theme. Bob, anything to
Yeah.
add?
Well, the schedulers I love,
Oh,
because I don't love email ping pong,
Mm.
just trying to pick a time, especially if it's more than one person. So personally, like for my any meeting, someone wants to talk to me, or I'm setting up time to prep for a podcast or to record the podcast, I use my schedule. I actually use an interview scheduler, but they had a free plan to just for anyone to use. So I use it. I'm not interviewing people. I'm just using the mechanics of it, and it's great, and people love it. I know some people think it's impersonal, but it's saving both of us time, and time is our most precious asset. So to me, that's a no-brainer. The note takers, I use that extensively as well, but I'm not in a big organization, so I imagine that gets a little tricky, depending on whether your manager's in the meeting, and you have a reason for not being there, or yeah, I think it depends on the circumstances. But if you absolutely wanted to be there and can't, as long as it's being recorded, I mean, I don't understand. I'm in a lot of communities where the community, like say there's a weekly call, that weekly call is recorded, and the recording is sent out, transcript is sent out. Well, what do we need these 12 other recorders? They're going to duke it out and see who did a better transcription, like Otter versus Read.ai versus Firefly. So, I mean, but this is part of the phase that we're in, where we're still trying to get acclimated with these tools, get accustomed to it. Is this appropriate? In some cases, is this ethical? And what is its purpose? Is it substituting for my presence? Well, we're not at the point yet where it's actually chiming in on your behalf, but that's not that far away, to be honest. If I can converse with somebody's digital twin through an AI assistant, and you have the note takers, well, what happens if you combine them? Well, now I could basically be in two places at once. So what are the ethics of that? So we're getting into some interesting scenarios, and part of the reason we're getting into them is because people are being, again, I'll say curious, and creative, right? So some of it's people trying to figure out where the line is drawn, and that line might be drawn in a different place depending on the situation and depending on the organization. So it's tricky.
Scary stuff. Honestly,
Yeah.
my initial reaction to you know, the Phil clone in Slack or on a call is that's a dystopian, scary scary future. But and to your point, you see it because it's a more interesting story. People build effectively like an online dating bot for them, right? And why not build a Slack bot that's you effectively? So
Let me
yeah,
jump in with one thing that I wish companies were doing a much better job of.
yeah.
I wish companies were formally having a place to put AI incidents. So when you see, like, one of the companies I had been following for a while, I was doing a long-term longitudinal study on them because they were just ramming through AI, like at all costs. It's just like more AI, whatever, let's just do it all. And it was going berserk and haywire and just messing up everywhere. And they weren't capturing the incidents.
Mm.
And some of the incidents were really like shocking things. Like they were telling their LGBTQ community, it was monitoring how fast they would talk, or their, sometimes there's a certain speech pattern with certain members of the community, and it would tell them to not do that. I was just like, so I wish that there was a place to log incidents. Not that you have to respond to all of them, but you might, after a while, compile those incidents and say, ooh, I don't like this. I bet there's a different vendor we should use for this that might be a little bit better. You just reminded me, Bob, when you said your translation softwares, because Otter's one of the best ones out there. And
Mhm.
I bet if you kept track of like who's messing up all the time, you'd be like, you know what, guys, we're going to stop spending money on these other ones. We're just going to pick this one. I just think that there's great value in that for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I
Totally agree.
mean, I was going to say, sorry, Phil. I was just going to say, I remember back at IBM, we had what was called the Technology Adoption Program. So basically, anybody that built something, at least, hopefully not alpha, hopefully it was at least like beta level, so it wasn't going to break everyone's devices. But you would have people kicking the tires, and you would basically have this created this culture of experimentation, right? So you could get feedback on things and say, this is working, this isn't, but it didn't necessarily have to be a technical issue. It could be, this doesn't seem appropriate, or what, wait, how did you know that
Exactly.
about me? Why? So you're
Right.
you're listening to, I said that in a in a group chat that I didn't think was public. Like, how did you absorb that information, and that influenced, recommendations you gave me for another, a blog to follow, or a learning course, or whatever. All these things matter, and anything related to HR, even cases that sound sort of benign, like I just described, um, the EU might consider that
Yep.
high risk, right? Because anything at all that influence someone's career trajectory, their opportunities to learn, their opportunities to advance, their opportunities
Yep.
to make more money, anything at all that affects that will come under the EU AI Act. Even something as simple as, oh, you should take this course.
Mm.
In Colorado, by the way.
Right. So there's a lot to think about there. And then, but yeah, so I do think there's just going back to something I mentioned before around like all this stuff around like compliance and governance or whatever. A lot of this I think of as sort of playing defense, but just like I was just talking about with this like culture of experimentation and innovation, um, when people gain more AI literacy and improve their readiness, they're going to have a lot of ideas about how to deploy it. And so on some level, I'd like to see organizations take advantage of that, because now you're bringing all that human, those durable human skills like creativity, ingenuity, empathy, and all these other traits that are innately human. And now you start to see how this human and AI sort of collaboration, or human and AI partnership, can evolve um, together. So we've got to basically play both defense and offense with AI.
What last question here, and as we do this, just because we're running shorter on time, I'm going to also launch a poll just to get general feedback on the session. If you wouldn't mind filling it out, really helps us to refine our webinar program. I'm curious, where's the puck going, right? So you're talking about what's going on in Colorado, in the EU. How do I sound smart in a meeting? Basically, when I'm talking about what should we be focused on now because it's coming down the pipeline in each of your opinions?
Carrie, you want to go first?
Oh gosh. That's how I feel. That's how I feel. Like, oh Lord. Um, everyone wants to talk about AI agents, so I'll bring that up. I have significant concerns about agents right now, so I'm going to ask everyone to pause on agents. Some marketing messaging uses the word agents, and they're not really agents. And some are really agents. And the reason I'm concerned about agents is because AI brings a whole new security profile to the equation that is just like, ooh, this is different. And we're not quite caught up with that yet. And agents amplify that by a million. The security issues inside of agents are really concerning. And we don't have good mitigations for them yet. So I know that's where the puck's going. I know companies are pressing hard for agents because it's really interesting to like stack your tasks together and have the agents like get things done for you. Um, I'm until we fix the security on that, I am concerned. Not to mention, we haven't really solved for the discourse in disparities and fairness and equality and just we're still getting our sea legs under us. So one thing at a time. And we have a lot of laws we're gonna see from the state level. So we have a lot to contend with here just in the next 12 months, let alone like 3 or 5 years out. So I can't wait to hear what Bob has to say.
Um, well, I agree with you on the agents and agentic AI. That's definitely getting thrown around quite a bit. Um, I'm concerned about that in part because it's going to be another, again, following the sort of privacy and cybersecurity trajectory. This is another thing that's going to have to be continuously monitored because this data is being shared across all of these systems through, we might still have, sort of APIs, but integration between from agent to agent is a lot less complicated than, one system to another. You're not going to have vendors sitting around spending, dedicating resources and spending 6 months working on their, Workday integration, right? Like that's going to start to sort of dissipate as you have, agents, talking to each other, but what are they saying and what information are they sharing across, which is why, again, going back to what I mentioned before around like being responsible by design, you need even Carrie knows this, even in the AI sort of governance space, there's AI governance tools that might help you analyze a particular system and and whether it's exhibiting adverse impact against specific pieces of legislation. And then you have AI assurance, which kinds of takes a little bit broader view and starts to let's look at data, let's look at algorithms, let's test all these systems throughout. And then you have some that really start back in the DevOps area in the early parts of how these solutions are built and do what's called AI observability. So let me look carefully at what you're doing from the earliest stages of this product or solution development, and let's make sure things are good from the beginning. I mean, you want to go back and, instead of doing root cause analysis after the fact and vendors pointing fingers at each other, let's go back and have the traceability to go back and observe this from the beginning and make sure that everything is trusted. And so I just think that's a more proactive and realistic approach as we move forward. I guess the other observation I would just say is there's still a lot of shiny objects out there because people see they're just trying to, get their slice of this AI, pie. So again, goes back to what Carrie and I talked about, just start asking better and tougher questions. And then if you want to start to increase your AI literacy and your company isn't providing sufficient resources, there's a lot of people out there, probably too many people out there with their expertise and their boot camps and their models. And, oh, by next weekend, you'll have a, $2 million ARR, business and whatever. It's like, so there's shiny objects from the vendors, and then you have snake oil from people, claiming to be experts. So just come back to Phil or Carrie or myself. If you have questions, I mean, we've got some resources that will help you make sure you're going to trusted sources, because there are plenty of trusted sources out there who are keeping track of all the AI developments.
I appreciate you saying that, Bob, and I appreciate both of your time, because I know you've got a lot of stuff to do, and neither of you are, trying to sell something to our audience or anything like that. And I just appreciate the insights, the knowledge, the serious research that each of you have done into this really important area that is going to, whether we like it or not, have very large impacts on our professional and personal lives from here on in. It's going to be sort of exponential, I think, unless something weird happens that is unpredictable. And so yeah, thank you both. I posted in the chat a couple minutes ago, takeaways doc. We'll also send that to everybody. I also posted links to upcoming webinars that we have on DE&I, as well as just sort of how to build your people operations network, which is so important to your career. And so, yeah, thank you everybody for joining, for your time, for your questions. We didn't get to everything, but hopefully we got to enough, and we'll stay tuned for the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.